Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk About It. This week, I'm doing something a little different. Over the next couple of episodes, I want to take you inside my Recognizing Grooming Before Exploitation masterclass and share small portions of what I teach in the course. The masterclass is more than 5 hours long, so obviously I can't cover everything here. But I want to give you a glimpse into the education and, more importantly, help you understand why learning about grooming matters. Because if we want to prevent exploitation, we have to learn to recognize what can happen before exploitation ever begins. And that's where I want to start today. One of the most important things I teach in the masterclass is this: grooming rarely looks like grooming in the beginning. I think that is one of the biggest reasons grooming can be so difficult to recognize. When people hear the word groomer, they may picture someone who immediately behaves in a way that seems creepy, inappropriate, or dangerous. But that's often not how grooming works. In fact, grooming can begin with behaviors that look completely positive: kindness, attention, encouragement, help, generosity, friendship, someone showing up when another person needs them. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Those behaviors by themselves are not grooming. Most people who are kind are simply kind. Most teachers who encourage a student are doing exactly what good teachers do. Most coaches who spend time helping an athlete improve are doing their jobs. Most adults who mentor children are trying to make a positive difference. Most people who give someone a gift aren't trying to manipulate them. That's why we have to be careful when we talk about grooming. We don't want to teach people to become suspicious of every healthy relationship. Instead, we need to learn to recognize the difference between healthy relationship building and a developing pattern of manipulation. And one of the biggest differences is what happens over time. Grooming isn't necessarily one behavior. It is often a process. A person who intends to exploit someone may gradually build trust, identify needs or vulnerabilities, create an emotional connection, test boundaries, and slowly change what feels normal. Because those changes can happen little by little, the person being groomed may not recognize what's happening. The people around them may not recognize it either. That's important because we often ask after exploitation is discovered, why didn't somebody see it? Sometimes the answer is because what people were seeing didn't look dangerous at the time. Imagine a child who is struggling socially. Maybe they're lonely. Maybe they don't feel like they fit in. Maybe they're having problems at home. Maybe they're struggling academically. Or maybe there isn't a major crisis in their life at all. They simply want what almost every child wants: to feel noticed, valued, accepted, and important to someone. Now imagine an adult comes along who seems to understand that child. They listen. They remember things the child tells them. They compliment them. They encourage them. Maybe they tell the child, "You're really mature for your age," or "I understand you better than most people do," or "You can always talk to me." Again, none of those statements automatically means someone is grooming a child. Context matters. But now imagine that relationship begins to change. The adult starts seeking more private time with the child. Communication becomes more personal. Maybe there are private messages, special gifts, secrets, or exceptions to rules. The adult begins positioning themselves as the person who understands the child better than anyone else. Eventually, the relationship starts moving away from healthy support and toward dependence. That's when we need to pay attention to the pattern. One of the concepts I talk about in the masterclass is transparency. Healthy adults don't generally need to hide appropriate relationships with children. They don't need secret conversations. They don't need secret social media accounts. They don't need a child to delete messages. They don't need to tell a child, "Don't tell your parents." Healthy mentoring can withstand transparency. That's something I want you to remember. Healthy relationships don't need secrecy to survive. When secrecy begins entering a relationship, we should pay attention, especially when secrecy is combined with other concerning behaviors, because once again, we're looking for patterns. Another concept I teach in the masterclass is how someone who grooms may recognize a need and begin filling it. And when I use the word need, I don't only mean something material. A need can be emotional. A child may need attention, acceptance, belonging, praise, encouragement, or simply someone who will listen. They may want someone to make them feel important or remind them that they matter. Sometimes there are material needs too: transportation, food, clothing, money, a phone, or a place to stay. But one of the things I want people to understand is that vulnerability doesn't always look the way we expect it to look. We sometimes have a picture in our minds of what a vulnerable child looks like, and that picture can cause us to miss children who don't fit the stereotype. Vulnerability can also be temporary. A child can live in a loving home with involved parents and still experience loneliness, insecurity, rejection, conflict, or a strong desire to belong. Someone who wants to manipulate another person can learn what matters to that person and then use it to build influence. Here's another distinction I want you to think about. Healthy support should ultimately help a child become stronger and more independent. Grooming can move in the opposite direction. The person begins making themselves increasingly important in the child's life. Eventually, the child may begin believing, "They're the only person who understands me. They're the only person I can talk to. They're the only person who really cares about me." That is a very different dynamic, and it doesn't necessarily happen overnight. That's why I often encourage people to stop asking only, "Was that behavior inappropriate?" and begin asking, "What is happening to this relationship over time? Is the child becoming more confident and connected to healthy people, or increasingly dependent on one person? Is the relationship transparent, or is it becoming more secretive? Are boundaries clear and consistent, or are exceptions continually being made? Is the adult encouraging healthy relationships with parents, caregivers, teachers, and other trusted adults, or slowly positioning themselves against those people? Those questions can reveal much more than looking at one isolated interaction. This leads into another important area I teach about: boundary testing. Boundary testing can be difficult to recognize because it may start small. A person may cross a minor boundary and watch what happens. Does the child object? Does another adult notice? Does anyone say anything? If nothing happens, another boundary may be tested, and then another. Over time, behavior that might once have felt unusual can begin feeling normal. Think about how powerful that is. If someone immediately crosses a major boundary, alarm bells may go off. But if boundaries change gradually, the person being groomed may adjust to each change along the way. It's like moving a line 1 inch at a time. Eventually, that line can be very far from where it started, but because each individual movement was small, it may have been difficult to recognize how far things had actually gone. That's why prevention education can't only focus on the final act of exploitation. We need to understand how someone can get there. This next part is personal to me. I was 15 years old when I was groomed. I wasn't kidnapped off the street. I wasn't physically taken away from my family. I continued going to school. I lived at home with both of my parents. And yet grooming and exploitation were happening in my life. When I look back now as an adult, with the knowledge I have today, I can see things very differently than I could see them as a 15-year-old girl. That's one of the reasons I created the Recognizing Grooming Before Exploitation Masterclass. I don't want our prevention efforts to begin only after exploitation has already occurred. I want adults to understand the process that can come before it. Imagine what could change if more parents understood grooming, if more teachers understood it, if more coaches understood it, if more volunteers understood it, if more healthcare professionals understood it, if more people in our churches and communities understood it. Maybe instead of asking afterward, "How did this happen?" we could recognize concerning patterns much earlier. Before we go any further, though, I want to make another point very clear. We have to be responsible with this education. A teacher giving a student extra help is not evidence of grooming. A coach encouraging an athlete is not evidence of grooming. An adult giving a child a birthday gift isn't automatically suspicious. A mentor listening to a struggling teenager isn't automatically doing something wrong. We need caring adults in children's lives. The goal of grooming prevention education should never be to frighten good adults away from children. The goal is to help us recognize when normal relationship building begins changing into something else. That's why I keep coming back to the word pattern. Look at the relationship as a whole. Look at changes over time. Look at boundaries. Look at secrecy. Look at increasing dependence. Look at attempts to isolate. Look at whether rules apply consistently. And perhaps most importantly, don't ignore concerning behavior simply because the person involved seems nice. We sometimes believe we'll recognize someone who intends to cause harm because they'll somehow look or act dangerous. But think about that for a moment. If someone appeared dangerous from the very beginning, it would be much harder for them to gain access and trust. A person who intends to groom someone may appear helpful, trustworthy, generous, responsible, and friendly. They may be well liked. They may be respected. In some cases, they may work very hard to gain the trust not only of the person they're grooming, but also of the people around that person. That's why understanding grooming requires us to move beyond stereotypes. We cannot determine someone's intentions simply by whether we like them. And we shouldn't determine guilt based on personality either. We look at behavior, boundaries, and patterns. As we begin wrapping up today, I want to leave you with something practical. Think about the children and teenagers in your life. Your children, grandchildren, students, athletes, children at church, or young people you mentor. Don't become suspicious of every relationship around them. Instead, become more aware of healthy boundaries and transparency. Teach children that safe adults don't ask them to keep uncomfortable secrets. Teach them that they can tell you when something feels confusing. Let them know they can come to you without automatically being blamed or punished for telling you something. Pay attention when a relationship begins becoming unusually exclusive or secretive. Most importantly, keep communication open. Prevention isn't about making children afraid of everyone. It's about giving children safe adults they can talk to and giving adults the education to recognize when something may be changing. What I've shared with you today is only a small portion of what I teach in my Recognizing Grooming Before Exploitation Masterclass. The full course is more than 5 hours of survivor-informed education. We go much deeper into how grooming develops, vulnerabilities, how trust can be manipulated, my survivor's 7 steps of grooming, boundary testing, isolation, trauma bonding, warning signs, exploitation, human trafficking, and what we can do when something concerns us. The course is self-paced, so you can complete it on your own schedule, and you'll receive a certificate of completion when you finish. You'll also have lifetime access, because I don't want this to be information you hear once and forget. I want you to be able to return to these lessons when you need them. If today's episode caused you to think differently about grooming, I hope you'll consider taking the full masterclass. You can learn more and enroll at survivorledlearning.com. And if you're listening and thinking, I already know about human trafficking, I especially encourage you to take a look. Because this course isn't just about human trafficking. It's about understanding what can happen before exploitation ever begins. In the next episode, I'm going to take you back inside the masterclass and talk about something that can be incredibly easy to overlook: boundary testing. We'll talk about why small boundary violations matter, how boundaries can be moved gradually, and why something that seems insignificant by itself can look very different when you recognize the larger pattern. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Let's Talk About It. If today's episode helped you see grooming from a different perspective, please share it with someone. The more adults who understand what grooming can actually look like, the more opportunities we have to recognize it earlier. Until next time, stay aware, keep learning, and remember, prevention starts long before exploitation.